Hello everyone, I am currently very sick at the moment, so please excuse my voice and just bear with me with this video. I really wanted to get this video out, so here we are. Jade is the 57th Warframe that has just been released. Now, Jade is actually insanely strong. In fact, she may just be one of the best frames in Warframe. I feel like we say this every time a new frame comes out, but we will have to find out in this video just how strong she is. She is 100% going to be one of the best frames in Warframe. Now let's not waste any time, shall we? And let's hop straight into the video. Now, where do we farm Jade? Once you complete the Jade Shadows quest, you will be awarded her blueprint. Alternatively, you can run the new Ascension game mode on Brutus, which is on Uranus. Jade's components have a chance of dropping when completing this new mission. Otherwise, if luck is not on your side, you can get vestigial motes, which can be turned into orders in the Larunda Relay on Mercury. Now let's talk about Jade's abilities. Her passive is, for lack of a better word, broken. You get 2 aura slots with her. This will ultimately allow you to have more capacity than any other Warframe, and this will also mean that you can easily run a budget build with Jade, as she doesn't need as much former. The other side of her passive is that some of her abilities will apply Judgment. Judgment will increase enemy damage vulnerability by 50% for 10 seconds. Her first ability is called Light's Judgment, which you throw down a well of light that will heal allies and will hurt enemies as well. You can have up to 5 judgments up at one time. Her first ability applies her passive, which will give enemies damage vulnerability. Her second ability is called Symphony of Mercy. Now this ability is quite amazing. You can cast it by holding down the ability. You will then have the option to cycle between 3 different buffs. The first one being increased strength for you and your allies, the second one being increased damage, and the third one being shield regen per second. This will also lower your shield recharge delay as well. Now, we will go over this later on in the video to make Jade relatively tanky with this ability alone. However, I will say what is cool about her second ability is the fact that you can cycle on the go instead of having to recast the ability for each different buff. This will allow for some active gameplay, but I will be honest, the shield regen is the best one in my opinion to keep Jade alive and her allies. The ability's aura will also be applied in affinity range for your allies. Her third ability is called Phantom Eyes. Think of Gloom. Instead, it's a cone that will slow enemies and drain their shields as well as their armor. Oh, and by the way, this is Jade's Helminth slot, which means we get another armor stripping Helminth as well. This will also deal a small amount of damage to enemies and apply heat. With this ability active, you can revive your allies from a distance as well. Her fourth ability is called Glory on High. Take flight with Jade, making use of her Exalted weapon, Glory. With Glory, you have the main fire and the alternate fire. Glory's main fire will also apply her passive, and when you pair your first ability with your fourth, it will also apply Judgment. When enemies are affected by Judgment, you can cast your alternate fire. It will then explode the enemies, dealing a large amount of damage to them. Casting your alternate fire will drain your energy. You will also receive a bit of damage reduction when you are flying. This is basically like Titania, except you're a bit slower and you deal way more damage. Also, another thing is when you kill enemies with your fourth's main fire or alternate fire, it actually increases the duration of your second ability. Before we go any further, could I ask if you could hit that like button, as it really helps me out. Thank you so much, my good tenor. Okay, that summarizes her abilities. Let's just go over her gameplay loop real quick. Jade's passive, first and fourth abilities synergize really well together. Her first ability is used to proc her passive, while her fourth ability benefits from the massive damage increase from it, specifically with the alternate fire. So when you are playing Jade in normal missions, you want to make use of this combo. Her first ability to apply her passive, cast your fourth ability so you can use the alternate fire of Glory, her Exalted weapon. If you want to make this even deadlier, you can keep your third ability up at all times, which will ultimately slow enemies and armor strip them at the same time. You want to then keep your second ability active at all times so you can gain shield regen, or buffing your allies with either strength or a damage increase. Now let's talk about her second ability real quick. Here we want to focus on the shield regen part of it. This is in theory Jade's only way of surviving. Besides the damage reduction you get when you activate your fourth, this will give you shield regen but a percentage base increase. So if you pair her second ability with a bit of strength, arcane aegis, and fast deflection, you could see how fast her shields regenerate. For most gameplay, this will make Jade incredibly hard to kill, especially when you pair it with her third ability. But I will say though, this depends on if you are playing either solo in Steel Path or in a group. With solo, you may struggle a little bit, but in a group you'll be fine. To make yourself even tankier, you can add Brief Respite onto one of your aura slots as well. Or you can add an Augur mod in your build. Regarding Jade's fourth ability and her alternate fire with Glory, it's actually very strong because you can throw down 5 Light's Judgments, but the distance in which you can detonate the alternate fire is incredibly far. For example, if I throw down a Light's Judgment by a door and move away to another room, I could still damage the enemies that are affected by her passive when running into the Light's Judgment. This will allow you to kill groups of enemies at once, and you can also get pretty strategic with this and place them at doors where enemies are spawning and just constantly spam your first ability, and that will ultimately allow you to delete groups of enemies. Now let's move on to how to build Jade. Most of Jade's abilities are cast and forget or channel ability. Her only active ability is her first ability, requiring you to constantly throw it down to proc your passive. This will mean building her for either duration and range will help her drastically. You can build her for efficiency if you would like, but I find with just equilibrium she is good on energy sustain. Scaling a bit of strength with her will help with her armor strip from her third ability, as well as her second ability with all the buffs you get from it. Regarding her 2 aura slots, well, this makes Jade quite interesting as she now has way more capacity than any other frame. This will mean you can get away with just 1 or 2 former with Jade. I personally did put 1 aura former on her. With 2 matching aura slots, you can get about 88 capacity with Jade. I personally like running Corrosive Projection, which will help us with the armor stripping from her third ability a little bit, and then Brief Respite to just help us with the initial shield regen when we shield gate. However, Growing Power isn't a bad option, or you can throw whatever aura you have available if you are a beginner. For a beginner setup, you want to focus on a balanced setup. Decent duration, a bit of range, and a little bit of strength. I would highly recommend running Equilibrium as well as Energy Nexus. Now again, you can only get Energy Nexus later on after you complete the Whispers in the Walls questline, but it only costs about 5 platinum on the market, so I would highly suggest farming some platinum and then buying Energy Nexus so you can get rid of the energy problems as a beginner. It is a super handy mod to have. A simple beginner build would look something like this. You can fill out Energy Nexus as well as Fast Deflection when you obtain those mods. In terms of the aura slots, use what you have available. This build right here for a beginner requires no former. I did form 1 Madurai and 1 Naramon slot into Jade, and that will help us for the Steel Path build if you would like to put 1 or 2 former into her. That pretty much covers the beginners for her. We now move on to Steel Path players. We follow the same principle here, however we can scale a bit more strength with Transient Fortitude and Umbral Intensify as well as Molt Augmented. The build pretty much looks the same except we run Rolling Guard. You can, if you would like to, switch it up a bit and run a bit more duration and range while lowering your strength, keeping Molt Augmented, which gives you free 60% extra strength. I do run Corrosive Projection and Brief Respite, but again this is flexible, you can change it to what you like. This pretty much covers my no Helminth Steel Path build. Another thing is you can actually use Archon Intensify with Jade as a procs with her first ability as well. And you can use Archon Vitality to double your heat procs from Glory. Now I will say trying to put a Subsume on Jade is really tough. Her kit just works. Exactly like all the newer frames that have just been released, it's actually hard to subsume some of them. The only ability that I could think of subsuming would be her first ability, but even then her 1 works so well with her other abilities that it's quite tough to do. You can make it work without her 1 as her Exalted weapon's primary fire does apply her passive. But if you subsume her 4th, then her 1 is basically useless because you can't use alternate fire to deal insane amounts of damage. However, if you really want to subsume something on her, Nourish over her first ability works really well. As basic as it is, the viral damage stacks incredibly well with the heat damage Glory provides, and just the overall damage with her 4th ability. This is what the Nourish build looks like, and on the flip side, if you are wanting a funny build, then you can subsume Gloom over her first ability. Let's just say it's dumb, but it works. You are basically slowing enemies down so much that you now have a full 360 degree slow as well as an armor strip. If you feel like your energy sustain isn't enough, you can use Arcane Energize or stack up more efficiency on your build. If you're wanting even more CC from a build, then you can subsume Mace's Shooting Gallery onto your 1 and use Muzzle Flash to CC enemies even further. This one is quite nice as the enemies are just constantly distracted and you basically just don't die. Honestly, from my testing, these are the only 3 subsumes that I could see that work with her. There may be more out there that I have missed, but personally I don't think Jade needs a subsume, and I really like how her base kit works. I just made these builds for those of you who want to subsume something onto her. I will say with a pull mechanic, she doesn't work that well because her third ability slows the enemies down so much, so Ensnare and so on don't really work that well with her. When it comes to building her Exalted weapon, Glory, I personally went for either Corrosive Heat or a blast build, because after the blast rework you can definitely see a difference in the damage, especially since Jade armor strips her enemies, so you can see the damage coming through. This is the cheapest setup for Glory, this is the end game setup for Glory, and here is the blast setup as well. Now let's move on to Archon shards with Jade. Here is the thing, she actually doesn't need much casting speed, so maybe one would work if you would like that. Otherwise, I personally would suggest running either duration or strength on her, depending on whichever one you are lacking. So Archon shards are pretty flexible with Jade. So what are my final thoughts on her? She's a great frame and she is very strong. She could definitely be in the top 5 Warframes list if DE doesn't nerf her to the ground. She is a super powerful support dealing insane amounts of damage while having the maneuverability of Titania basically, just not as fast. If you think about it, she is an overpowered Titania. She's definitely an A+ in my books. I can see her being used in a lot of public lobbies, and I personally love her synergy with her first and fourth ability. She's definitely worth getting, especially if you are a fan of an offensive support playstyle. Otherwise, I don't want to drag this video out any longer, I just wanted to get straight to the point. Jade is super strong and doesn't even require a lot of former. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. As always, a massive thank you to all of our channel members. Your support really means a lot. I will see you all in the next one.